In the federal courtroom in Dallas, Texas, a heavy atmosphere hung over the room as Judge John Carter banged his gavel opening a tense trial. Jasmine Crockett, a Democratic congresswoman and former defense attorney, stepped in with blazing confidence. She represented James Carter, a whistleblower, daring to stand up against Charles Lawson, a wealthy developer accused of embezzling millions in public funds for personal projects. With a recording and financial documents in hand, Crockett believed this would be an easy victory. She was accustomed to pressure from her days defending the poor to her role as a lawmaker fighting injustice. But today something felt different at the defense table. An unexpected figure emerged. Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary under the Trump administration, stood there youthful, yet cold as a special legal advisor from the White House. She supported Lawson's legal team, a key ally of the conservative establishment. Her presence sent a shiver through the courtroom, a spokesperson in a courtroom. Crockett thought to herself, her lip curling in contempt she had never faced. Leavitt before, but that name was tied to Trump enough to put her on guard before diving into the story. Comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. The sharp bang of Judge John Carter's gavel echoed, marking the start of the trial in the federal courtroom in Dallas, Texas. Jasmine Crockett rose from the plaintiff's table, her curly hair neatly styled and her eyes sharp as a blade. She adjusted her blazer and stood to the center of the courtroom with the confidence of someone seasoned in tough legal battles. The crowd fell silent. The press stopped, whispering. All eyes on her. This was Crockett's moment, and she knew it. Your Honor, her voice rang out strong and clear. Today I represent James Carter, brave enough to expose Charles Lawson's blatant corruption. We have irrefutable evidence. She held up a small USB drive, the light from the window glinting off it like a symbol of justice. This recording, captured in Lawson's own words, shows him admitting to embezzling $5 million in Dallas taxpayers' money. For his personal gain, Crockett turned to the defense table where Charles Lawson sat with a calm expression. His eyes narrowed, as if calculating. She continued, "That's not all. We also have financial documents, bank statements, and contracts proving the illegal flow of public funds into Lawson's private accounts. This isn't speculation, Your Honor. It's plain as day." She placed the USB and a stack of documents on the table, her challenging gaze directed at Lawson and his legal team. Judge Carter, with his silver hair and stern demeanor, nodded slightly. "Miss Crockett, proceed." He said, his tone even, but tinged with curiosity. Crockett gave a discreet smile. She knew she was in control, and it felt sweet. She had spent weeks preparing for this case, analyzing every line of the documents, every second of the recording. Lawson wouldn't escape this time, she was certain of it. But then, a sound cut through the room, the faint creak of a chair, the click of high heels on the wooden floor. Caroline Leavitt rose from the defense table, her petite frame exuding an overwhelming presence. Lawson's legal team, led by Robert Klenier, a middle-aged man in a dark blue suit, turned to her. Slightly surprised, Leavitt didn't care. She stepped forward, holding a thin stack of papers. Her eyes locked on Crockett. "Your Honor." Leavitt spoke, her voice low and sharp as a blade. "I am Caroline Leavitt, White House press secretary, here as a special legal advisor at the administration's request. Before Miss Crockett goes further, I request an examination of the validity of this so-called evidence." The courtroom shuddered. A wave of whispers spread from the back rows, the press scribbling furiously. Crockett spun around, her brows knitting tightly. "Are you kidding me?" she snapped, unable to hide her contempt. "You're Trump's spokesperson, not a lawyer. This is a courtroom, not a White House press briefing." Leavitt didn't flinch. She tilted her head slightly, a cold smile blooming on her lips. "Miss Crockett," she replied, her voice smooth as flowing water, "I don't need a law degree to see you're standing on shaky ground." "Are you sure it's legal?" Crockett blinked, momentarily thrown off. She hadn't expected Leavitt to even speak, let alone challenge her outright. Lawson unsmirked, his eyes lighting up as if he'd found a way out. His legal team, initially quiet, began to stir, murmuring among themselves. "Judge." Carter banged his gavel again. "Order!" He barked, his gaze shifting from Crockett to Leavitt. "Miss Leavitt, if you have an opinion." Stated it clearly. "But I remind you, this is a courtroom, not a political stage." Leavitt nodded, but her eyes never left Crockett. "I'll clarify right now, Your Honor," she said, her tone calm yet brimming with unnerving confidence. "Miss Crockett, go ahead and present, but I suggest you brace yourself, because when I speak you won't like what I bring." Crockett clenched her fists, her initial sense of control starting to waver. She looked at Leavitt, the young woman with blonde hair and steely eyes, and suddenly realized this was no ordinary opponent. The courtroom fell silent, but the air grew hot as a furnace. The battle had just begun, and Leavitt had landed the first unexpected blow. Judge John Carter banged his gavel once more, his sharp eyes sweeping the courtroom. "Miss Lee, present your point," he said, his tone stern, but tunable to mask his curiosity at this sudden intervention. Jasmine Crockett stood there, her hand still on the stack of documents, her gaze fixed on Caroline. Leavitt. She still couldn't believe a press secretary, not a lawyer, dared to challenge her in the middle of a courtroom, but as Light stepped forward, her confidence like a warrior entering the arena. Crockett felt a cold breeze creep in. Leavitt held her thin stack of papers, her voice low and cutting like a freshly sharpened blade. "Your Honor," she began, "Miss Crockett calls this recording irrefutable evidence, but I beg to ask, is it legal?" She turned to Crockett, her steely gaze unwavering. Under the Federal Wiretap Act 18 U.S.C. Section 2511, any recording requires the consent of at least one party involved. In Texas, both parties. Crockett, do you have legal authorization for this recording, or did James Carter record it without Lawson's consent? The courtroom went dead silent, save for the scratch of press pens on paper. Crockett blinked slightly. Thrown, she'd prepared meticulously for this case, but Light's question hit a corner. She hadn't considered. This is evidence from a whistleblower. She countered, her voice still strong, but a bit rushed. Federal law protects people like James Carter when they expose corruption. This recording falls within an exception. Leah tilted her head, that cold smile blooming again. An exception, she repeated, her tone almost toying with her prey. "Miss Crockett, I'm afraid you're confusing whistleblower protection laws with evidence collection rules. The Whistleblower Protection Act, 5 U.S.C. Section 2302 only shields Carter from retaliation. It doesn't legitimize an illegal recording. Do you have a court order for this? Or are you just banking on justice overlooking procedure?" Crockett clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She felt the eyes of the crowd, the press, and Charles Lawson, whose smirk grew more pronounced. "I don't have to answer someone with no legal standing like you." She shot back, her voice rising slightly. "You're just a press secretary, not a judge or a lawyer." Leavitt didn't budge. She stepped closer, pointing at her papers as if they were a weapon. "I don't need a law degree to read the law, Miss Crockett." And she said, her voice steady as water over stone, "and the law is clear. If this recording lacks legal consent or a court order, it has no place in this courtroom. I request its immediate exclusion." A ripple of murmurs spread from the back rows. Lawson's legal team, silent until now, began nodding, whispering among themselves. Robert Clean, the lead attorney, glanced at Leavitt with a mix of surprise and approval. Lawson crossed his arms, his eyes gleaming as if he'd spotted the light at the end of the tunnel. Judge Carter raised an eyebrow, his voice cutting through the air. "Miss Crockett, Miss Lee raises a serious issue. Do you have a response? How was this recording obtained?" Crockett took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. "Your Honor," she said, her voice slowing as if weighing each word. "James Carter recorded it during an internal meeting where Lawson himself admitted wrongdoing. This was an emergency situation, and Texas law allows recordings in such cases to protect the public interest. But even as she spoke, she felt her argument weakening. She had no court order that was the truth, and Leavitt had struck that weak spot. Leavitt shook her head slightly as if pitying her opponent. "Your Honor," she pressed, "on Texas has no public interest. Exception, as Miss Crockett just invented state law, is crystal clear. Both parties must consent. Unless a judge orders otherwise, Crockett has no order, no consent, and thus no valid evidence. I urge the court to consider this before we waste more time." Crockett felt the blood rush to her face. She turned to Leavitt, her eyes blazing. "You think you're so clever," she growled, her initial calm slipping away. "You're just Trump's puppet here to shield a corrupt crook, Leavitt." Reply immediately. She stood there, arms crossed, her gaze calm, yet sharp as a blade. "I'm not here to argue politics, Miss Crockett," she said at last, her voice low but audible to all. "I'm here to ensure the law is upheld, and right now, you're breaking it." Judge Carter banged his gavel, again his tone firm enough. "Miss Crockett, I need a clear answer. Do you have legal authorization for this recording?" Crockett opened her mouth, but the words caught in her throat. She looked down at her documents, then at Leavitt, the young woman with steely eyes standing there confident, as if she owned the courtroom for the first time that day. Crockett felt her foundation shake. It had landed her first blow, and it was sharper than anything she'd ever faced. The air in the federal courtroom in Dallas stretched too as a snapping string. Judge John Carter banged his gavel again, his stern gaze fixed on Jasmine Crockett. "Miss Crockett, I'm waiting for an answer," he said, his voice hard as steel. "Does this recording have legal authorization?" Crockett stood there, gripping the table's edge, her eyes darting from the judge to Corrine, Leavitt, the one who'd cornered her, with a cold smile on her lips. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but anger had been simmering in her chest since Leavitt first spoke. "Your Honor," she began, her voice trembling slightly, but still clinging to calm. "I've explained that this is evidence from a whistleblower gathered in an emergency to expose corruption. The law stands with justice, not criminals like Charles Lawson." Leavitt crossed her arms. "Here, ye's never leaving Crockett, Your Honor," she interjected, her tone steady but sharp as a razor. "Miss Crockett is dodging the question. No court order, no consent. That's the truth. She can talk about justice all she wants, but the law doesn't run on feelings. I repeat, I request this recording's exclusion." Crockett whipped around to face Leavitt, her eyes blazing. "You dare say I'm dodging?" she snarled, her hand trembling with rage. "I was in courtrooms like this when you were still playing with dolls. Miss Leavitt, who do you think you are, teaching me about the law?" The courtroom shuddered at Crockett's outburst. The press stopped writing, looking up. Charles Lawson smirked, his eyes gleaming as if enjoying a fine play. His legal team, led by Robert Clean, exchanged satisfied glances. But Light didn't flinch. She stood there, petite, yet radiating dominance, as if Crockett's anger was just a passing breeze. "Miss Crockett," Light replied, her voice low but clear to all, "I don't need to teach you the law. You've already failed yourself. But if you want to keep going, show me your next piece of evidence. I'm curious how weak it'll be." Crockett felt the blood surge to her face. She couldn't believe Light's arrogance, a press secretary, no law degree, daring to challenge her, a former defense attorney with decades of experience. She turned back to the table, her trembling hands lifting the financial documents. "Fine," and she growled, her voice rising with fury. "If you want to play, I'll show you. Here are the bank statements and contracts, money flowing straight from public funds into Lawson's pockets, $5 million undeniable." She slammed the documents onto the table, the sound ringing out like a declaration of war. But Light didn't blink. She stepped forward, holding a single sheet from her stack, her eyes scanning the statements like a hawk hunting prey. "Your Honor," Light said, her voice still calm. "Miss Crockett just mentioned contracts and statements. May I ask, was the subpoena for these documents properly approved? Because I have a copy here and it shows a serious flaw." Crockett froze her eyes, darting to her own stack. What flaw, she snapped, her voice cracking. With surprise, Leavitt held up the paper, light shining through to highlight a scrolled signature. This subpoena, she said, was signed by a court clerk, not a judge under the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, Rule 45. Only a judge can authorize a subpoena. In a case like this, Miss Crockett's documents are invalid, and I request their exclusion along with the recording. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The press scribbled frantically, some standing for a better view. Lawson crossed his arms, his smile now as clear as morning sunlight, clean whispered to his colleagues, nodding in approval. Crockett felt the floor tremble beneath her. "You're making this up," she shouted, professionalism gone. She lunged toward the table, slamming her hand on the documents. "This is a farce. Who do you think you are? A spokesperson daring to stand here and lie to protect a criminal?" Leah tilted her head, her gaze icy. "I'm not making anything up, Miss Crockett," she replied. "I'm just reading what you didn't see. Check it if you want, but I suggest you calm down. You're embarrassing yourself." "Order," Judge Carter barked, banging his gavel so hard the sound echoed through the room. "Miss Crockett, control yourself now, Miss. Leave it. Bring your evidence here. Leave it." Stepped forward, handing the paper to the court clerk with chilling calm. Crockett stood there, panting, gripping the table's edge as if to keep from collapsing. She looked at Leavitt, the young woman with blonde hair and steely eyes, and for the first time in her career, she felt utterly powerless. Judge Carter examined the paper, his brows furrowing tightly. "Miss Crockett," he said, his voice slow. "Miss Lee, it is correct this subpoena lacks a judge's signature. Do you have an explanation?" Crockett opened her mouth, but no words came. She looked down at her documents, then at Leavitt, who stood there as calm as if she'd just won a chess game. She'd prepared everything, the recording, the documents, but Leavitt, with a few words, had shattered it all. Crockett muttered, her voice fading. "She can't do this." But the reality lay bare before her. Light wasn't just challenging her, she was winning. Judge Carter banged his gavel again. "I'll consider Miss Light's motion," he said, his tone strict. "Miss Crockett, if you have more evidence, present it, but I advise you to stay calm." Crockett didn't reply. She looked at Leavitt, her eyes burning with a mix of fury and confusion. She'd lost her cool, and the whole courtroom had seen it. The conflict had exploded, and Light had just pushed her into an abyss with a sharpness no one saw coming. The federal courtroom in Dallas fell into a stifling silence, broken only by Jasmine Crockett's ragged breathing, echoing through the space. Judge John Carter held the paper Caroline Leavitt had handed over, his brows knitted as he read each line. His eyes moved from the document to Crockett, then to Leavitt, the young woman standing there with a tranquil air, as if the world rested. In her hands, Crockett gripped the table's edge, her nails digging into the wood, trying to reclaim some control after her outburst. But deep down, she knew everything was slipping away. "Miss Crockett," Judge Carter spoke, his voice slow but heavy as a hammer. "Miss Leavitt has pointed out that the subpoena for your financial documents wasn't approved by a judge. This is a serious issue. Do you have a response?" Crockett took a deep breath, struggling to suppress the rage burning in her chest. She turned to Leavitt, her eyes blazing with a mix of fury and unease. "Your Honor," she began, her voice shaky, but still grasping at professionalism, "this subpoena was issued in an emergency. A court clerk signed it to expedite the corruption investigation. That doesn't diminish the evidence's value. The truth remains. Charles Lawson embezzled public funds." Leavitt tilted her head, that cold smile blooming again. "Your Honor," she cut in, her voice smooth as water over stone, "Miss Crockett is trying to justify an irreparable mistake. The Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, Rule 45, are crystal clear. Only a judge can authorize a subpoena in cases like this. A clerk's signature has no legal weight, and she knows it." Crockett fired back instantly, her voice high with indignation. "She's twisting the truth." She pointed at Leavitt, her hand trembling with anger. This isn't about procedure, it's about justice. Lawson's a criminal, and I won't let her use cheap tricks to shield him. Judge Carter banged his gavel, the sound reverberating through the room. Miss Crockett, enough, he snapped, his eyes stern. I don't care about your emotions, I need legal facts. Miss Leavitt, go on. Leavitt nodded, stepping closer with unnerving confidence. She raised her hand as if holding Crockett's fate in her palm. Your Honor, she said, her voice low but piercing. I'm not just requesting the financial documents exclusion for a procedural error. I also want to revisit the recording Miss Crockett put so much faith in. I have a precedent to back my argument. The courtroom went still, all eyes on Leavitt. She pulled another sheet from her stack. The light highlighting bold text, in United States First Nixon in 1974. She began, her voice steady, as if lecturing. The Supreme Court ruled that illegally obtained evidence, no matter how valuable, cannot be admitted if it violates legal process. Crockett's recording has no consent from Lawson, no court order, and thus it's completely worthless in this courtroom. Crockett's heart pounded. United States First Nixon, she muttered, her voice faltering. She knew that case. Every lawyer did but Leavitt, a press secretary with no law degree. Citing it so precisely sent a chill through her. Leavitt didn't stop. She turned to Judge Carter, her steely gaze unflinching. Your Honor, both Miss Crockett's recording and financial documents fail legal standards. I request their immediate exclusion. If Miss Crockett has no more valid evidence, I suggest ending this trial to avoid wasting everyone's time. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The press scribbled frantically, some standing too. Snap photo. Charles Lawson crossed his arms, his smile now radiant as midday sun. Robert Clean, Lawson's lead attorney, nodded to his colleagues, his eyes glinting with awe and pride. Crockett stood there stunned as if slapped. She looked down at the documents, then at Leavitt, the young woman, petite yet overwhelmingly authoritative. She can't, she muttered, her voice fading. She turned to the judge, trying to object. Your Honor, this is a conspiracy. She's protecting a corrupt man by twisting the law. Judge Carter raised a hand, signaling silence. Miss Crockett, he said, his voice cold as ice. I've heard enough. I'll review the evidence and arguments from both sides. He turned to Leavitt, his eyes narrowing slightly. Miss Leavitt, are you certain of what you've just presented? Leavitt nodded, unwavering. Absolutely certain, Your Honor. She replied, the law doesn't play favorites, and I'm here to ensure it's enforced correctly. Carter sighed. Setting the paper down, he scanned the courtroom, the press scribbling, the crowd whispering, Lawson smiling, then looked back at Crockett. I need time to review, he said, his voice deliberate, but I must say Miss Leavitt's argument is very tight. Crockett, if you have no other evidence meeting legal standards, this will be tough for you. Crockett felt the floor collapse beneath her. She opened her mouth, but no words came. She looked at Leavitt, her eyes burning with a mix of rage and helplessness. Leavitt stood there, arms crossed, her gaze calm but sharp, Asa blade that had just sliced through everything Crockett had built. Judge Carter banged his gavel again. The trial is recessed for 15 minutes, he declared. I'll decide after a thorough review. The crowd exploded in chatter. The press rushed to the doors, phones raised to capture Leavitt and Crockett. Lawson stood patting Klein's shoulder, his eyes gleaming as if he'd dodged the reapers. Scythe. His legal team whispered among themselves, nodding in admiration of Leavitt's performance. Crockett slumped into her chair. Hands cradling her head, she stared at the documents before her, once her ultimate weapons, now just useless paper. She muttered, her voice, how did she do this? Leavitt returned to the defense table, her gaze briefly meeting Crockett with a subtle smirk. She said nothing, but her eyes said it all. She'd turned the tables and the world had seen it. This was the battle's climax. Not with emotion, but with razor-sharp logic and legal mastery, beyond all expectations. Leavitt, a press secretary, had made the courtroom her stage, leaving Crockett with only bitter defeat to face. The bang of Judge John Carter's gavel still echoed in Jasmine Crockett's mind. As he called for a 15-minute recess, the federal courtroom in Dallas erupted in noise. The press charging out the doors with phones and cameras raised, trying to snap shots of Caroline Leavitt, who just turned the trial into her personal stage. Crockett slumped into her chair, hands cradling her head, her vacant stare fixed on the documents before her. The paper sonts, her ultimate weapons, were now just scraps, worthless, torn apart by Leavitt's few cutting words. She panted, trying to sort her thoughts. How did she do it? She muttered, her voice barely audible. She'd faced all kinds of opponents in her career, sly lawyers, rigid judges, but never had she been taken down so swiftly and thoroughly. Leavitt, a press secretary with no law degree, had made her a loser in front of the world. Across the room, Charles Lawson stood slapping Robert Klein's shoulder with a grin as bright as a lottery win. That girl's a genius, he whispered, his voice thick with satisfaction. Cry nodded, his eyes sparkling with amazement. I didn't expect her to be this sharp, he replied, glancing at Leavitt. She stood there, petite yet commanding, talking to a team member. That subtle smirk lingered on her lips, as if this victory was just another day at work. Crockett looked up, watching the scene through eyes blurred with anger and despair. She saw Lawson smile, his team nodding in approval, and Leavitt Theone, who demolished everything she'd built. She's not a lawyer, she muttered, clenching her fists. She's just a spokesperson. How does she know this stuff? A colleague from Crockett's team, a middle-aged woman named Linda Harris, approached and placed a hand on her shoulder. Jasmine, calm down, Linda said, her voice soft but worried. We can still salvage this. We need to find a way to push back. Crockett gave a bitter laugh. Push back? What, Linda? She smashed the recording, the documents, everything. She cited United States verse in Nixon like she was born in a courtroom. She leaned back, rubbing her forehead. Underestimated her, and now the whole world knows I failed. Linda sat beside her, glancing at Leavitt. She's not a lawyer, but she's clearly well prepared, she said, her tone pensive. She knew exactly where we were weak. Maybe the White House trained her for this. The White House, Crockett repeated, her voice dripping with bitterness. Trump and his cronies. I knew this case stank of politics, but I didn't think they'd play this dirty. She looked at Leavitt, standing there calmly chatting with Clean, as if nothing had happened. She's not just protecting Lawson, she's protecting their whole system outside the press. Noise filtered in. A reporter shouted into a phone. White House press secretary just took down Congresswoman Crockett in corruption trial. Another typed furiously on a laptop. Caroline Liv, from spokesperson to legal star in a day. Crockett had heard every word, each one a knife to her pride. She stood, walking to the window and looking out, trying to breathe and regain her composure, but Leavitt's image, those steely eyes, that cold smile, haunted her mind. I was too confident, she whispered to herself. I thought she was just Trump's young lackey, nothing more, but she's a monster. Linda approached, her voice gentle. Jasmine, we haven't lost completely. The judge is still reviewing. If we find other evidence. Crockett cut her off, her voice rough. Other evidence, Linda, don't you see? She turned everything we had into a joke. I yelled. I slammed the table. I let her win on law and spirit. She turned, her eyes clouded with despair. She's not just good, she's too good. Across the room, Leavitt finished her chat with Cleany. She glanced at Crockett, her eyes passing over with unassuming confidence. She didn't need to say anything. Her victory was obvious. Orson approached, shaking her hand with gratitude. You saved me today, he said, his voice low. Trump picked the right one. Leavitt smiled faintly. I just did my job, Mr. Lawson, she replied, her tone even, but her eyes said more. She knew she'd done far beyond that. She'd turned a legal case into a political triumph, and the world was watching. Crockett watched the scene, her fists tightening. She turned to Linda, her voice low but resolute. She thinks she's won, she said. But I'm not done. I won't let Trump's spokesperson take me down for good. Linda nodded, but her eyes betrayed worry. She's not just a spokesperson, Jasmine, she whispered. She's something far more dangerous. Crockett didn't reply. She looked out the window, the growing clamor of the press outside ringing in her ears. White House press secretary takes down Congresswoman in court. The words echoed in her head like a sentence. She knew this defeat's fallout would be big, not just for the case, but for her reputation. Leavitt had shifted the courtroom's air. And now Crockett faced the truth she'd lost, at least today, but deep inside a fire still burned. She looked up, her gaze hardening. "She's good," she muttered, "but I'll be back." The defeat stung, but it was also a warning, and Crockett wasn't one to give up. The 15-minute recess passed like a blink. But to Jasmine Crockett, it felt like a century. She stood in the hallway outside the Dallas federal court holding a cup of water. She didn't drink, her distant gaze fixed out the window. The press's clamor still echoed from afar, headlines like "White House press secretary takes down Congresswoman" swirling in. Her mind, she'd regained her calm, but the sting of defeat still throbbed. Leavitt hadn't just won. She'd made Crockett look like an amateur. Before the world, the courtroom doors opened, and Caroline Leavitt stepped out, the petite frame radiating dominance. She wore a simple black suit, her blonde hair gleaming under the hallway lights. Charles Lawson and Robert Klein trailed behind, whispering to each other. But Leavitt paid no mind. She moved to a quiet corner, pulling out her phone, her focus sharp as if checking White House messages. Crockett watched her, gripping the water cup tightly. She wanted to turn away, to erase the name Caroline Leavitt, but a strange pull drew her back. She took a deep breath, set the cup on a bench, and walked over. Her shoes clicked on the stone floor, each step a silent declaration of war. Leavitt looked up as Crockett approached, her steely eyes unwavering. "Miss Crockett," she said, her tone even, "I thought you'd left already." Crockett stopped a few steps away. Arms crossed, she looked at the young woman before her, the one who'd shattered everything she'd built in the courtroom, and for the first time she felt no anger. Instead, she saw an undeniable truth. "You're good," she said, her voice low but clear. "I don't want to admit it, but you're damn good, a true legal genius." Leavitt tilted her head, a subtle smirk, flickering then fading. She slipped her phone into her pocket, her gaze locking onto Crockett. "Thanks for the compliment, Miss Crockett," she replied, calm but brimming with confidence. "But I'm not here for praise. I'm here to win." Crockett gave a bitter chuckle, but this time without scorn. "I see that," she said, her tone sharp yet sincere. "I thought you were just Trump's puppet, a spokesperson with a few fancy lines, but you proved me wrong, dead wrong." Leavitt didn't respond right away. She stood, their arms crossed, her eyes scanning Crockett as if sizing up an opponent. "You're not the first to underestimate me," she said at last, her voice low but cutting. "And you won't be the last." Crockett nodded slowly, her gaze hardening. "I lost today," she said, her voice dropping, "but not because I'm lesser, because you're too damn brilliant. The way you cited United States v. Nixon, the way you spotted the subpoena flaw, I don't know where you learned that stuff. But it's terrifying." Leavitt smiled faintly, the first hint of warmth that day I learned on the job. She said, "When you work for President Trump, you either know everything or you get crushed. Today was just a normal day for me." Crockett looked at her, a flicker of unspoken respect in her eyes. "A normal day," she repeated, her tone thoughtful. "If today's normal for you, I don't want to see your best day." Leavitt let out a soft laugh, a brief sound that eased the tension. "You'll find out, Miss Crockett," she said, her eyes glinting, "because I've got a feeling this isn't the last time we'll meet." Crockett nodded, her arms relaxing. "You're right," she applied, her voice firm with resolve. "Next time I won't let you win so easily. I learned my lesson today, and I won't forget it." Leavitt reply, but her eyes said it all. She welcomed the challenge. They stood there staring at each other in silence, a mutual respect forming between two rivals, Crockett with her deep experience and fire for justice, and Leavitt with her innate sharpness and unshakable loyalty. They were two sides of a coin, opposites, yet equals. Linda Harris's footsteps echoed from afar, breaking the moment. "Jasmine, we need to get back," Linda called, her voice anxious. "The judge is about to rule." Crockett nodded, but her eyes stayed on Leavitt. "See you around, Miss Leavitt," she said, her voice low but loaded with meaning, "and next time I'll be ready." Liv smiled, confident, but not arrogant. "I look forward to it, Miss Crockett," she replied. Then she turned, walking back to Lawson's legal team with a calm stride, as if their confrontation was just a small part of her day. Crockett watched her go, her fists clenching. She turned to Linda, her eyes blazing with new determination. "She's a genius," she said quietly, her voice a mix of bitterness and admiration. "But I won't let her win again." Linda nodded, but her eyes showed worry. "She's not just a genius, Jasmine," she whispered. "She's the toughest opponent we've ever faced, Crockett." "Didn't," reply. She walked toward the courtroom, head high, the fire in her chest reigniting. Leavitt had won today, but their battle was just beginning, and next time Crockett swore she wouldn't lose, never again. The federal courtroom in Dallas quieted as Judge John Carter returned, ruling to exclude Jasmine Crockett's evidence, postponing Charles Lawson's case indefinitely. Caroline Leavitt left the courthouse with a calm demeanor, her victory not only saving Lawson, but also solidifying her standing in the Trump administration. The press swarmed her, but she just smiled and walked away. Leaving behind the echo of a rising legal star, Crockett had returned to Congress. Her gaze tougher than ever. Today's loss was a scar, but also a spur. She sat in her office, flipping through documents, whispering to Linda Harris, "Next time I won't let her win." The fire in her burned stronger, ready for the next fight. On White House TV, Leavitt appeared at a press briefing, answering trial questions with a confident smile. "I just did my job." Her eyes sparkled, as if already seeing her next clash with Crockett. Their battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. The story of Jasmine Crockett and Caroline Leavitt's courtroom showdown sharply reflects the polarization and fierce competition in today's American society, especially in political and legal arenas in modern America, where Democratic and Republican values often clash bitterly. The fight between Crockett, a progressive lawmaker battling corruption, and Liv, at Trump's sharp conservative press secretary, symbolizes an ideological collision. Leavitt, despite no law degree, outmaneuvering Crockett with razor-sharp arguments like citing United States Bevers Nixon or spotting the subpoena error, shows how knowledge and preparation can trump traditional experience. This mirrors a truth in America, where individual talent and adaptability often outweigh reputation or status. The lesson from this tale isn't just prepare well, but never underestimate an opponent based on their appearance or role. Crockett lost because she dismissed Leavitt as a spokesperson, blind to her ability in American life. From boardrooms to community debates, you might face Leavitts who defy molds yet pose real danger. Learn from Crockett. Instead of letting emotion take over, like when she slammed the table and yelled, "Stay cool." Study your rival closely and always have a backup plan. Modern American life demands adaptability and respect for others' hidden strengths, because as Leavitt proved, victory comes not from titles but from skill and resolve. Don't forget to subscribe to catch who'll be the next courtroom genius. Thanks for joining us. See you with even more gripping legal drama.